The Mau Mau Rebellion, also known as the Mau Mau Uprising, was a significant event in Kenya's struggle for independence from British colonial rule, taking place primarily between 1952 and 1960. Rooted in historical grievances against colonial injustices, exploitation, and land dispossession, the rebellion was characterized by violent clashes between the Mau Mau militant group of Kenya and British colonial forces. This is one rebellion that history will remember for many years to come. It remains till date one of the first recorded accounts of organized rebellion against colonial forces by the indigenous people of Africa. In this edition of Back in History, we take you back in time to the story of the Mau Mau Rebellion, which took place in Kenya. Welcome to this edition of Back in History. Before delving into the Mau Mau Uprising, it is important to understand the context of colonial rule in Kenya. The British colonized Kenya in the late 19th century during the scramble for Africa. Colonization imposed a system that marginalized local populations in Kenya. Colonial authorities established a land alienation policy that took fertile land from the indigenous people, particularly the Kikuyus, and redistributed it to European settlers, leading to widespread poverty and discontent. The Kikuyu increasingly found themselves pushed into less productive areas, undermining their traditional livelihoods. In addition to land dispossession, the British implemented a system of political exclusion, denying Kenyans any meaningful participation in the governance of their own country. The harsh realities of colonial rule thus created an environment filled with resentment and agitation among the Kikuyu and other communities. The culmination of growing dissatisfaction with colonial rule then gave rise to the Mau Mau movement in the 1940s. The term Mau Mau is believed to derive from the Kikuyu phrase Muiguitania, meaning the one who unites. The group comprised mainly Kikuyu people, but it also included members from other ethnic communities. The movement was initially rooted in various forms of protest and economic boycotts against colonial policies. In 1947, the Kikuyu Central Association, the KCA, was established to advocate for land rights, political representation, and social justice. However, the KCA's moderate approach proved ineffective against the uncompromising colonial administration. Consequently, more radical factions emerged. By the early 1950s, the Mau Mau adopted a more militant approach to achieving their demands, advocating for armed resistance against British rule. The rebellion began in earnest on October 7, 1952, when a series of violent attacks against British officials and settlers erupted, marking the official start of the Mau Mau Uprising. The movement employed guerrilla warfare tactics targeting British settlers, police, and loyalist Africans. The Mau Mau fighters sought to reclaim land and promote self-determination for Kenyans. The British government declared a state of emergency on October 20, 1952, deploying thousands of troops to suppress the uprising. The forces employed brutal tactics, including mass arrest, torture, and summary execution. They established detention camps where alleged Mau Mau sympathizers were held without trial, leading to widespread human rights abuses. Conditions in the camps were horrific, with numerous accounts of violence and mistreatment and death. The Mau Mau movement adhered to a sense of Kikuyu nationalism and fought for the restoration of land rights. It is worth noting that the Mau Mau did not have a centralized command structure, which made it difficult for the British to quell the uprising. Instead, local cells operated autonomously, which helped sustain the rebellion over the years. The Mau Mau Oath was a crucial element of the movement. It was a vow taken by members to fight for independence and not compromise or collaborate with colonial authorities. The oath also created a sense of commitment and solidarity among those involved, binding them to the cause. The Mau Mau rebellion drew international attention, particularly from the human rights violations perpetrated by British forces. Reports of torture, execution, and forced displacement prompted condemnation from various human rights organizations and anti-colonial activists worldwide. The violence and brutality of the British response led to growing condemnation within the United Kingdom, further complicating the colonial authorities' stance. In 1955, the British government conducted a public inquiry known as the Phelps-Stokes Commission, which sought to address grievances and eventually recommended reforms. However, progress was slow and the rebellion continued. In 1956, the Mau Mau rebellion began to lose momentum due to various factors, including increased British military pressure and arrest of key leaders and the shifting of the political landscape in Kenya. Although thousands of Mau Mau fighters remained active, many were killed or captured, and public support began to wane. Concurrently, the British government recognized the need for political reforms to address grievances and quell the dissent. In 1960, the British announced a gradual transition to self-governance, signaling the beginning of the end of colonial rule in Kenya. Kenya eventually gained independence from British colonial rule on December 12, 1963. Jomo Kenyatta, a leading figure in the nationalist movement and a former detainee who had been imprisoned during the uprising, became the country's first president. The Mau Mau movement remains a complex and contentious chapter in Kenya's history. The movement is often celebrated for its role in uniting various communities against colonial oppression, providing a foundation for future struggles for rights and self-determination throughout Africa. Today, the Mau Mau Uprising is a subject of study in post-colonial studies, reflecting on themes of resistance, identity, and the long-term implications of colonialism. The Mau Mau rebellion was indeed a pivotal moment in Kenya's history, embodying the struggle for freedom against indiscriminate colonial oppression. It highlighted issues such as land rights, national identity, and self-determination. The bravery of the Mau Mau fighters has been commemorated in various ways, embodying the spirit of resistance against injustice and contributing to Kenya's journey towards independence. In the course of the rebellion, several lives were lost, and most of the fighters were arrested and locked up for many years. The events that led to the Mau Mau Uprising and the violent crackdown of the movement by British colonial forces shall remain indelible in the minds of many in Kenya and other countries in Africa for many years to come. It remains one of the darkest moments in the history of Africa. Thanks for watching this edition of Back in History, and do remember to subscribe to this channel or follow the page for regular notification on every new video. I remain your friend and host, Ekeminudim, wishing you the best of time as you continue to accompany me on this mission for the documentation and preservation of the history of Africa for today and for tomorrow.